John Miller, a former Army medic who had shut himself away after losing his son in a rescue storm years ago, lived quietly in a small cabin on the edge of the city. Only Ranger, his aging canine partner, remained by his side, the last living piece of a life he no longer believed he deserved. But on a brutal Christmas Eve, with a blizzard tearing through the
Please
streets,
open the door.
a
We need
faint,
help. It's
desperate
freezing out
knock
here.
slipped through the storm. When John opened the door, a homeless mother collapsed into his arms. Her two freezing children clung to her legs, their lips blue, their hands trembling. That single moment, that single knock, would pull John back into the world he had abandoned and set off a chain of events that would test his courage,
Please open the
reopen his
door. We need
wounds,
help. It's
and
freezing
ultimately
out
save
here.
more lives than he ever imagined. Before we begin, share where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, subscribe for more stories of sacrifice, second chances, and the miracles God still sends into this world when we least expect them. Your support truly means the world. The storm arrived earlier than the forecast had promised. Snow, once drifting lazily across the valley, hardened into sharp, wind-driven sheets that scraped against the old cabin walls like restless fingers searching for a way inside. John Miller, a 48-year-old former Army medic with a broad, tired face and a salt and pepper beard, stood by the window and watched the world vanish behind a curtain of white. His breath fogged the cold glass, and the faint hum of the small backup generator was the only reminder that life still pulsed inside the cabin. Beside him lay Ranger, his aging German shepherd, 12 years old, sable fur fading at the edges, eyes thoughtful and amber like old whiskey. Ranger lifted his head as the wind howled, ears twitching toward something beyond the wall of snow. John barely reacted. He had learned long ago that the wilderness spoke constantly. Only rarely did it call him. He moved back to the wood stove, tossing in another log, the crackle of flame filling the silence that grief had carved into his life. 7 winters had passed since Daniel, his son, never returned from a rescue mission in a storm much like this one. Since then, John had spoken little, worked little, and lived only in the shallow way a man can when the world has taken his heart and left his body walking. He was reaching for Ranger's bowl to refill the water when the dog suddenly stood, muscles stiffening. A low rumble vibrated in Ranger's chest, not a threat, but a warning. Something unfamiliar, something alive, approaching through the storm. John straightened. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his own pulse tightened. Then came the knock. Weak, muffled. Nothing more than a hollow thud, nearly swallowed by the wind. If not for Ranger pacing toward the door, John might have dismissed it as a shifting branch or a drifting piece of ice hitting the siding. But the knock came again, fainter, desperate. John unlatched the door, bracing his shoulder against the wind as he pulled it open. Snow swirled violently, framing 3 silhouettes like half-erased drawings. A woman stood in front, leaning heavily to shield 2 small children behind her. She looked no older than 35, but hardship had carved its own calendar into her face. Her long blonde hair was tangled with ice, strands whipping across hollow cheeks. Her skin, normally sun-warmed, was pale and wind-burnt, and exhaustion deepened the shadows beneath her amber eyes. Her coat, an old brown parka with a ripped sleeve, hung off her thin, trembling frame. Behind her, the children clung to each other. The boy, about 6, dark-haired and thin as a sapling, held the hand of a little girl perhaps 4 years old, whose curls were stiff with frost. The girl's lips were bluish, She swayed as though sleep were dragging her down. "Please," the woman whispered, voice cracking. "Our car, the heater died. We didn't know the storm would be this bad." She tried to continue, but as cough forced her forward. John didn't hesitate. His body, long starved of purpose but still wired for crisis, moved on instinct. He ushered the children inside first, then wrapped an arm around the woman as she stumbled past the threshold. Ranger circled them with a slow, steady precision, alert, evaluating, yet sensing the danger came from the cold, not from these strangers. John shut the heavy door, and the wind's roar dulled to a distant moan. Heat rushed at them from the stove, though it felt painfully small compared to the storm pressing against the cabin. The woman collapsed into the nearest chair, cradling her daughter. John fetched blankets, wrapping the shivering girl and handing another to the boy. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Maria," she managed, pushing damp hair from her eyes. "This is Eli and Lila." She looked toward the window and whispered, "I thought the lights were out everywhere. Yours was the only one still on." "Backup generator," John replied. "It's nothing fancy, but it holds." Maria nodded weakly. She tried to smile for her children, but her hands trembled violently. Eli kept glancing toward Ranger, wide-eyed but not afraid. Ranger lifted his nose to sniff the boy, then sat beside him with an old soldier's patience. Lila, wrapped in blankets, lay across her mother's lap. John crouched beside them, checking the child's pulse and breathing. Slow, shallow, but steady. "Hypothermia starting," he murmured. "But she'll come back once she warms up." Maria's eyes filled with tears of exhausted relief. "I just wanted them somewhere safe. We kept driving, but the cold, it was getting inside the car." John looked at her coat again. Frayed edges, thin lining, patches poorly sewn. A long journey, a hard one. Ranger moved closer to Maria, then settled near her feet, forming a living barrier between her children and the draft coming from under the door. John noticed and exhaled slowly. Even after all this time, Ranger still knew how to save someone. He rose, grabbing a pot to heat water. Behind him, the storm raged, clawing at the windows as if furious that it had lost its prey. Inside the cabin, fragile warmth blossomed. Small, uncertain, but real. For the first time in 7 years, John sensed something shift in the quiet place inside him, where grief had rooted itself. The storm had brought strangers to his door, but perhaps it had brought something else as well. The cabin grew warmer as the storm hammered the world outside, its fury muffled by wood, wool, and the steady breath of a generator that sounded older than the house itself. John moved through the small kitchen with a focus that felt borrowed from another lifetime, a time when helping strangers was second nature, when saving lives was part of his pulse. He heated water, brewed weak tea from an old tin, and returned to the living room where Maria and her children huddled near the stove. Maria sat upright now, though exhaustion still clung to her like frost. In the softer light, her features appeared even more worn, skin sallow from long days without proper rest, cheekbones sharper than they should be, and eyes full of the wary alertness of someone who had been disappointed too many times to trust comfort easily. But beneath that fatigue lived a stubborn resilience, the kind that refused to shatter even under winter's cruel hand. Eli sat cross-legged on the rug near Ranger. The boy's hair, a dark chestnut, fell over his forehead as he leaned forward to study the old dog. Ranger tolerated the attention with an almost regal patience, lowering his head so Eli could timidly brush a hand across his fur. Lila, wrapped tightly in blankets, lay with her head on Maria's lap, her breathing steadier now, though her small hands still trembled from the remnants of cold. John handed Maria the tea. "Drink slowly," he said. "You're all still warming up." She nodded, fingers wrapped gratefully around the warm metal cup. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't think anyone would answer." John didn't respond right away. He didn't know how to explain that he had stopped expecting anyone to knock. That Ranger's alert had surprised him precisely because visitors had become myth, like sunlight in a storm. Instead, he asked, "How long were you in the car?" Maria exhaled shakily. "Since yesterday afternoon. We drove until the gas ran out at the edge of town. The heater died sometime after sunset." She glanced down at her children. "I kept thinking, if we just pushed through the night, maybe the storm would miss us. But storms don't care about hope, do they?" Her voice cracked, and she turned away to hide it. Eli, hearing the strain, scooted closer to his mother, resting a hand on her arm. John watched the small gesture. It tugged at something fragile inside him, something he had buried with Daniel. To distract the ache rising in his chest, he changed the subject. "There's food," he said. "It's simple, but warm." Maria nodded gratefully. "Anything helps. The shelters were all full. They turned us away before the storm even began." She hesitated, then added softly, "It's been like that for a while. Every place we try is either overcrowded or they don't want kids." John felt his jaw tighten. Human cruelty always found new ways to disappoint him. He ladled soup from the pot into bowls and brought them over. As the children ate, some color returned to their faces. Ranger shifted toward the stove, lying down with a groan of old bones. For a time, the storm outside faded into a distant roar, and the small cabin became a fragile but genuine sanctuary. Eli's attention drifted across the room. His gaze landed on a frame positioned carefully atop the wooden shelf above the fireplace. Inside it was the portrait of a young soldier, mid-20s, sharp blue eyes, uniform crisp, smile bright and steady. The boy leaned forward. "Who's that?" The question struck like a sudden wind. John stiffened, his breath caught between ribs grown too accustomed to silence. Maria immediately whispered, "Eli, don't pry." But John lifted a hand gently. "It's all right." He set his bowl down. "That's my son, Daniel." Eli looked from the picture to John with a quiet sincerity far beyond his years. "He looks brave." He was. John's voice softened, wrapped in the ache of memory. "He served in rescue operations, saved a lot of people." "Where is he now?" the boy asked. Maria gasped quietly, but John shook his head. "I don't mind." He looked at the flames inside the stove, the way they twisted and reached for air. "He died in a storm, not far from here, trying to get a family out of a snowed-in car." Silence swelled gently, not heavy, not sharp, just honest. Eli leaned closer to Ranger, stroking the dog's neck. "Did Ranger know him?" John nodded. Ranger was his partner. They worked together for years. Lila stirred then, eyes fluttering open. "Doggy," she murmured. Ranger lifted his head and gently nudged her small fingers with his muzzle. The warmth in the room deepened. Maria placed a trembling hand on John's arm. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice low but earnest, "for your loss, and for bringing our problems to your door." John looked at her, this worn woman still fighting for her children despite every setback, still pushing forward through cold and fear. "You didn't bring trouble," he said quietly. "Storms do that on their own." Before Maria could answer, Ranger suddenly rose, ears pricked. A low rumble vibrated in his chest. He looked toward the front door, not in curiosity this time, but in warning. The hairs along his spine lifted. John stood slowly, heart tightening with instinct sharpened by loss. Something, or someone, was outside. Ranger stepped closer to the door, posture stiff, breath controlled. The storm moaned around the cabin walls, and then 3 sharp thumps against the porch boards. Not wind, not snow. A presence. John reached for the lantern. Ranger growled softly, amber eyes blazing. The light flickered as John approached the door. Whatever waited on the other side was small and frightened. But in a storm like this, even small things carried danger. He placed a steadying hand on the doorknob. Ranger braced himself beside him, and John pulled the door open just a crack. The wind screamed against the cabin walls as John pulled the door open just enough for the lantern's glow to spill onto the frozen porch. Snow spiraled through the gap like shards of broken moonlight. Ranger stepped forward first, posture low, muscles tense yet controlled. His breath puffed in steady clouds as he leaned into the storm's scent, nose working with the precision of years spent reading danger long before humans sensed it. A small figure huddled beneath the overhang, a shape barely distinguishable from the shadows. When the lantern light touched it, the shape flinched violently. "It's okay," John murmured, kneeling despite the cold biting into his knee. "You're safe here." The figure lifted its head. It was a boy, maybe 10 years old, with windburned cheeks, soaked hair plastered to his forehead, and eyes wide, not from fear alone, but from sheer, bone-deep exhaustion. His jacket, too thin for winter, hung unevenly over his small frame, as if borrowed in haste. John recognized the look instantly, the hollow stare of someone who had pushed past every limit just to keep moving. "Help," the boy whispered, voice cracking. "My mom, she's hurt. The car." His words trembled apart before he could finish. Maria rushed closer, instinct guiding her more than thought. Even in her own weariness, her compassion moved quickly. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" she asked, wrapping her own threadbare coat around his shoulders. "Noah," he gasped. She told me to run, to find someone, before she—" The sentence collapsed under the weight of what he feared. John caught him gently under the arms, helping him inside where warmth clung stubbornly to the dim air. Ranger followed, never taking his eyes off the boy, assessing his scent, the cold on him, the fear. Inside, the lantern revealed more detail. Noah had dark curls matted with frost, pale skin that should have been ruddy with youth, and thin lips pressed tight, as if holding back a sob he didn't believe he had the right to let out. Maria guided him toward the stove, easing him down onto a quilt. Eli and Lila stared with wide, solemn eyes, children recognizing another child in distress with frightening clarity. John fetched a first aid kit, kneeling beside Noah. "She's still alive?" The boy nodded quickly. I think so. The car hit something, slid off the road." His breath shuddered. I couldn't open the door. She wasn't waking up. John's chest tightened. He had seen this before. He had lived this before. The memory of Daniel, snow swirling around him, radio static cutting through the wind, surged like a phantom chill. He forced it down with practiced discipline. "You did the right thing coming here," he said, voice steady. "You saved her by running." Ranger approached the boy then, the old dog's posture softening. He nudged Noah's hand gently with his nose, offering a kind of wordless reassurance only a canine could give. Noah's fingers curled into Ranger's fur, and for the first time since he'd arrived, his shoulders loosened. Eli sat beside him without hesitation. "You're safe now," Eli said with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived his own storms. Lila crawled closer and placed a tiny hand on Noah's blanket. No words were spoken, but something fragile shifted in the room, fear bending into hope, if only slightly. John rose and moved to the basement door. "I need to check something," he said. Ranger followed him, paws silent on the wood floor. Downstairs, the basement was a cramped, low-ceilinged room filled with old crates, gear from John's service years, and a steel lockbox sitting on a workbench. The box was scratched, corners dented, its presence heavy with memory. Earlier that night, Eli had touched it gently, as though sensing the pain sealed inside. John ran a hand over the lid now. The storm outside roared as if demanding an answer from him. "I won't lose another one," he whispered. Whether to the box, to Daniel, or to himself, he wasn't sure. Ranger pressed his head into John's leg. And in that touch, John understood something. The boy upstairs needed him now. Not tomorrow. Not when rescue teams arrived. Now. He drew in a steady breath, then climbed back upstairs. The cabin lights flickered, then died entirely. The generator had finally surrendered. Darkness folded over the room, broken only by the faint glow of the stove. Maria gasped softly. The children froze. John grabbed the lantern and lit it again, the flame small but determined. "Storm took the power," he said. "Lanterns will have to do." Then, another sound. A heavy thud against the outer wall. Not an animal, not wind. Something mechanical, metal scraping wood. Noah's eyes widened. That sounded like the car," he breathed. John handed the lantern to Maria. "Stay with the kids. Keep the door locked." He didn't say the rest. "If I don't come back immediately, wait for Ranger's signal." Ranger stood at the door, tail stiff, muscles coiled with instinctive readiness. John wrapped his coat tighter, securing the hood as wind rattled the windows. The storm surged like a living thing, claws raking the cabin's edges. "I'm coming with you," Noah said suddenly, stepping forward despite his shaking knees. "You know where the car is," John admitted, crouching to meet the boy's gaze. "But it's too dangerous. You're staying here." Noah opened his mouth to argue, but Ranger nudged him back toward the stove with surprising firmness. It worked. Noah sank down reluctantly. John opened the door, bracing himself as icy wind punched into the cabin. Snow churned around him, wild and merciless. Ranger stepped outside first, scanning the dark, growling low at something unseen. Then he barked once, a sharp, urgent command that reverberated straight through John's bones. The storm answered with its own roar. John gripped the railing, lantern in one hand, determination in the other. Somewhere in the blinding dark, a woman was trapped, and he had lost too much already to ignore that call. He stepped into the storm. Ranger bounded ahead, and the door closed behind them, sealing the fragile light inside. The wind did not ease when John and Ranger left the cabin. Instead, it rose with fresh fury, whipping snow sideways in blinding sheets. The lantern's flame fought desperately against the gusts, trembling like a fragile heartbeat in the dark. Ranger moved ahead with purposeful strides, nose low, tracking Noah's scent trail through the storm while John followed, boots sinking deep into the drifts. The cold stung like needles, but he pushed forward, driven by instinct and memory, the echo of Daniel's last mission, pressing against the weight of the night. Every step reminded him of the one life he couldn't save. Tonight, he refused to add another to that count. Back inside the cabin, Maria listened to the storm clawing at the walls while holding Lila close. The dim lantern light carved gentle outlines across her worn features. She watched Noah, who sat rigid near the stove. His small fists were clenched in his lap, knuckles white against the quilt. Eli sat beside him, trying to distract him with small whispers, but Noah barely blinked. His breath trembled, eyes fixed on the door like a thread pulling him toward the blizzard. Maria recognized that look. It was the same expression she had worn the night she realized she had nowhere left to take her children. She moved closer and knelt in front of Noah. "They'll find her," she said softly. "John knows these storms." Noah's voice broke. "But what if she's not? What if I waited too long?" "You didn't," Maria answered, brushing a strand of wet hair from his forehead. "You ran for help. That's the bravest thing a child can do." "But brave doesn't matter if—" He swallowed, unable to finish. Before Maria could reassure him further, a sharp metallic crash split through the night, a sound far too close to be thunder. It shuddered through of the cabin walls like a violent heartbeat. The lantern flickered. Eli jumped. Lila whimpered. Maria hurried to the window and wiped frost with her sleeve. Down the slope, where the street curved, a tall utility truck skidded sideways on the icy road. She barely had time to register it before the vehicle slammed into a cinder block pole with a second explosive crack. Sparks burst from the broken fixture, scattering orange light across the swirling snow like dying fireflies. The children gasped. Maria pressed a hand to her mouth. Another accident, another danger. But before she could react, Noah bolted to his feet. "That's close to where our car was," he shouted. "Noah, wait!" Maria lunged, but too late. The boy sprinted toward the door, flinging it open. A blast of frigid wind hurled snow into the cabin. "Noah!" Eli cried. What happened next unfolded in a blur. The boy slipped on the icy threshold, stumbled forward, and nearly vanished down the slope toward the road. But a streak of motion cut through the storm behind him. Ranger, racing back toward the cabin, responding to the crash with instinct as sharp as lightning. The old canine reached Noah in 3 bounding leaps, snagged the boy's jacket collar gently but firmly in his jaws, and yanked him away from the drop. Noah fell back against Ranger's chest, heart pounding under the dog's steady grip. Ranger kept him pinned until Maria rushed outside and gathered Noah into her arms. Her breath trembled as she held him tight. "You can't run out there. You'll freeze. Or worse." Noah sobbed into her shoulder, fear spilling out of him at last. Ranger released him only when Maria carried him back inside. Snow blew through the open door again, and Maria glanced into the storm. The fear in her eyes changed, becoming something sharper. She knew John was out there now, facing the same treacherous roads, the same raging wind that had nearly taken Noah. She shut the door firmly, then knelt to check Noah's soaked sleeves. Minutes crawled by, slow, heavy, echoing every fear in the room. Maria paced near the fire. Eli curled around Lila. Even the lantern's flame seemed uneasy. Then, the sound that broke the silence was not the storm, but a faint, distant bark. Ranger returned to the door, tail stiff, posture alert. Maria lifted her head. "He's calling John," she whispered. Out in the white void, John trudged through thigh-deep snow, breathing hard, lantern light flickering across his face. The storm roared, erasing shapes and sound, but not Ranger's signal. He heard it, faint but unmistakable. He paused, listening. A second bark came, closer than expected. "Good boy," he whispered into the wind. When John reached the curve of the road, he saw it. The overturned car, half buried under drifts, its hazard lights blinking weakly, casting a feeble red pulse across the snow like a fading heartbeat. He scrambled toward it, lantern swinging. Ranger darted to the passenger side, barking urgently. John dropped to one knee and peered inside. A woman lay slumped against the steering wheel, mid-30s, brown hair tangled across her pale face, her lips tinged with blue. A deep cut streaked across her forehead, frozen blood glittering like dark rubies in the cold. Her chest rose and fell shallowly. "She's alive," John breathed, relief thawing a part of him he didn't realize had frozen. But the car frame was warped from the impact, pinning her legs under crushed metal. John braced himself and pulled at the door. It groaned, but barely budged. Ranger crawled through the shattered back window, wedging his body between the cold wind and the unconscious woman, shielding her from the worst of the storm with his own warmth. Just as he once had done for Daniel. John felt his throat tighten. "I won't lose her," he said. "Not tonight." He took a step back, planted his feet, and pulled with everything the last 7 years had beaten out of him. The metal shrieked. The door cracked open. Ranger barked once, sharp, triumphant, and John reached inside, hands steady, ready to bring someone home again. The storm felt heavier as John pried open the warped door. Snow swirled into the crushed cabin of the car, coating the unconscious woman's legs where twisted metal pinned them down. Her breathing came in thin, erratic gasps. Ranger kept his body wedged against her side, shielding her face and chest from the worst of the wind. His old eyes flicked toward John. Steady, urging, the same look he had once given Daniel. John grasped the bent frame and pulled again, muscles strained. The storm roared louder as if pushing him back. Memories pressed in, the radio static, the collapsing snowbank, Ranger whining beside Daniel's unmoving body. No, not again. He repositioned his boots and heaved with a raw determination that tore something loose inside him. The metal gave way, inch by inch, until the frame shifted enough for John to slide his arms under the woman's shoulders. Ranger backed out through the broken window, leaving room. John lifted her carefully, feeling the weight of her limp body sag into his arms. Her head fell against his shoulder, cold and feather light. "Hang on," he murmured. "Your boy's waiting." He lowered her into a fireman's carry, braced himself, and pushed through the knee-deep snow with Ranger at his flank. The wind tried to shove them off balance, and twice John slipped, nearly toppling under her weight. But each time, Ranger nudged him upright, barking sharply into the dark. "Drive forward. Don't stop." It took nearly 15 minutes to climb back up the incline toward the cabin, each step a battle against the storm. Lantern light glowed faintly from the porch, trembling through the frost like a signal calling them home. When John reached it, Maria flung the door open, eyes wide with relief and fear. "Is she?" "Alive," John said through ragged breath. But barely. Maria cleared the table in seconds while Eli grabbed blankets and Noah stood frozen in the doorway, face pale, torn between terror and hope. When John laid the woman down, Noah rushed forward, nearly collapsing over her. "Mom! Mom! Wake up!" His voice cracked, cracking the room with it. Maria guided him back gently. "Let her breathe, sweetheart. Let John work." John checked for fractures, bleeding, and signs of frostbite with practiced movements. He wrapped her in blankets, elevated her feet, and pressed 2 fingers to her carotid artery. A pulse, weak but present. "She needs warmth, not movement," he said. "We wait." Then silence fell, thick with fear. Noah stood trembling between Maria and Eli, hands clasped so hard his knuckles whitened. Ranger lay beside the woman, chest rising and falling in slow, deep breaths, as if offering his own steadiness to her. Minutes crawled. Outside, the storm continued raging, shaking the cabin and rattling the windows. Then a sound, small, broken, but unmistakably human. A groan. The woman's eyelids fluttered. Noah surged forward again, unable to stop himself. "Mom! Mom!" She blinked, struggling to focus, her lips parted. "Noah?" He burst into tears, burying his face against her shoulder. She weakly wrapped an arm around him. I thought I lost you," she whispered. Noah shook his head fiercely. "John saved you, and Ranger." She turned her gaze to John, eyes brown and soft beneath bruises and frostbite, full of a gratitude too large for words. "Thank you," she managed, voice faint and hoarse. John swallowed hard. "You have a strong boy. He did the hard part." Maria tugged Lila closer, watching the reunion with a tenderness that hurt. Her eyes shimmered, not just with empathy, but with a piercing realization. This could have been her, if she hadn't found the cabin, if Eli hadn't spotted that flicker of light, if someone hadn't answered the door. She put a hand over her mouth, breath trembling. Eli noticed and stepped closer, touching her arm. The smallest gesture, the largest meaning. A sudden knock shook the walls, loud, abrupt, official. John moved instinctively toward the door, Ranger rising at his side. When he opened it, 2 police officers and an EMT team stood on the porch, snow plastered to their jackets. The older officer stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, salt and pepper beard, the kind of weathered seriousness that came from decades of winter calls. "We got reports of a utility crash and a missing woman. Power lines down across 3 streets," he said. "Neighbors saw lights here. You folks all right?" John stepped aside so they could see the scene inside. The blankets, the stove, the woman just regaining strength, the boy clinging to her, and the old K9 lying protectively beside them. Recognition dawned in the officer's eyes. "Miller," he said, voice softening. "John Miller." John tensed. "Haven't heard that name in a while." The officer exhaled, something like relief mixed with surprise. "Didn't think you were taking calls anymore." "I didn't," John said. "Tonight wasn't a call." His eyes went to Noah's mother. It was a choice. EMTs entered and began assessing her condition. Noah hovered near her, refusing to let go of her hand. When they prepared her for transport, she looked again at John. "Please," she whispered, "tell him, thank you for saving me." John nodded, unable to speak. When the officers and medics left, carrying mother and son through the snow toward the ambulance, silence settled again, soft, gentle, healing. Eli tugged at John's sleeve. "Can we stay until morning?" Maria bit her lip, unsure whether she had the right to hope. John looked at the three of them, this fragile family that had stumbled into his doorway, into his grief, into a space that had long been carved out only by loss. Ranger nudged Maria's leg, then curled beside Eli and Lila as if choosing for himself. John's voice was quiet, rough at the edges. "The storm hasn't passed yet," he said. "You stay as long as you need." The final gust of wind howled outside the cabin walls. But inside, for the first time in years, John felt something warm take root where only emptiness had lived. Not a promise, not a declaration, just a beginning. A new family formed not by blood but by survival, and the light one house offered in the darkest night of winter. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or angels in the sky. They come quietly on a winter night through a single door that opens when someone chooses kindness instead of fear. On that Christmas Eve, in a storm fierce enough to swallow an entire city, a homeless mother found warmth, a lost boy found hope, an injured woman found life again, and a broken veteran rediscovered the part of his heart he thought God had taken away forever. It was not luck. It was not coincidence. It was grace. The kind the Lord sends when He knows we are too tired to keep walking alone. And maybe that is the true miracle hidden in this story, that every one of us, no matter how weary or wounded, can still become the light someone else needs in their darkest night. A warm porch, a helping hand, a decision to open the door. Small acts in our eyes, but in God's hands, they become salvation. So, as you finish listening to this story tonight, I hope you carry its quiet truth into your own life. There is always someone praying for a miracle, and sometimes you are the miracle God is trying to send. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to share it with someone who might need a little hope tonight. Leave a comment about a moment when God showed up in your life when you least expected it. And if you believe in second chances, in grace, and in the power of compassion, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. May God bless you, protect your home, and warm your heart, just as He warmed that small cabin on a stormy Christmas night. Amen.